Hello again. Good morning. Um, I know this series of videos and pretty much all the videos from this point forward from the last few weeks, since this Kwun uh, sacred place of practice and study, has been opened. It's the first of its kind. Um, I've committed to every Wednesday night having some sort of a talk, lecture, symposium about um, different concepts, the different aspects of Buddha's teachings. Buddha taught in 5 distinct stages. And I don't like to read on video because it seems kind of rude, so I hope you'll accept my apology for that. But, first of all of the study material that I put together for my talks, I make available on the threefoldlotus.com website. So if you go to the threefoldlotus.com website, on the front page, you'll see a big graphic, and you scroll down just a little bit, or maybe you don't need to scroll down, and then you'll see 2 black and white logos. And that's one way in which, if you click on one of those, you'll go to the home page of the study site, the study resource of the site. And you'll see a bunch of buttons there. And each one, I've tried to keep it as concise as possible. But they're all the basic concepts: the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the 3 imperatives, the 3 realms, the 10 factors, the 10 worlds. All these almost like word problems, but they're all the fundamental sources, scholarship that I've dug out from different places. And this is my one filter through any of the information that I use and that I disseminate to you to understand Buddhist teachings correctly, is I am really hard-nosed about real, authentic scholarship, which doesn't always come from high priests, whatever you might call them, or scholarship within different sects of Buddhism, or even just from the Nichiren sect, which is the final point of scholarship for Buddha's teachings, to align them and show and demonstrate his ultimate teaching. But I look everywhere. I look for what was the foundation of that. And again, I respect the lineage. So I want to know, what did Tendai actually say? What were his treatises? And I have lots and lots of books. I can't put them all online. But I do try to make them available either through our little bookstore here or my bookstore online, where things are copywritten. Then I'll have links to them. But the Buddha over and over said, by the way, to those who sometimes question the books that I put out, some of the books that I put out are my modernization and language cleanup of extant information that's already out there. And people sometimes have a hard time with that and say, well, how can you do that? Well, throughout the Lotus Sutra and in other sutras, the Buddha, and especially in the Lotus, repeatedly says in several of the chapters that those who teach this law must recite, copy, share, disseminate, write, rewrite, re-record the teachings and distribute them widely. So anybody who's already done that is following the Buddha's teachings. What I'm doing with some of them is redressing some of the westernizations that muddy the waters and confuse people constantly. Sometimes they're words like that get in the way of understanding what the Asian mindset has always been about the mind. In Asia, throughout history, the mind and heart are connected as one. That's why when we chant or recite volumes of the sutra, our hands are folded like this, not like this. This is a wishing position. This is a waiting for somebody else to help you position. Okay? That's prayer. This is meditation, appreciation, connection with, determination to, a resolve, or as I love this guy's description, so I put it online. Um, Let me tell you who he is. But there's a little document online that says resolute. I love that word. I wish I'd have thought of it. This is from Reverend Niso Kano, Bishop of the Ikegami Honmonji Temple in Tokyo. And again, this doesn't come from a particular, this comes from a particular Nichiren sect, but it's a different sect than the one that I took my vows in. So I don't have any prejudice against any other sects other than ones that disinform, misinform, and confuse the Buddhist teachings. I can't tolerate that. And Buddha was very, very strict about this. It's the one thing about Buddhism is it's really based on constant scholarship. There can be no Buddhism without study, period. These are the Buddha's words. And so let me just read this really quick. Resolute in mind means to have a strong determination for keeping one's aim in mind by all means until its accomplishment and defying any delusion. This is the phrase that should replace any use of the word faith anywhere in the Buddhist teachings. Faith is so often misused and morphed over the centuries so as to imply submission to something external. That implication is poison to the Buddhist practitioner, whose actions and thoughts must be purely driven from self-observation and with self-determination. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, and some of that is, again, my clarification, but there's a huge difference between, especially the Western mind, to say, I have a resolute mind. I know what I want out of this. I know what my goals are, or at least I have a strong idea what they are, and I'm ready to accept, intercept, and integrate whatever knowledge of as my growing perception deepens and broadens. The enlightenment that comes to me in the process is something I'm definitely going to integrate as I grow myself, my self-perception, and my perception ultimately of all things. That's far different than saying, please give me, or please open my mind up. Who are you talking to? That's a short circuit. It's all you. You are already enlightened. So all you need to do is awaken it. So awakening it is a process of taking the clouds out of the way and seeing clearly how life works. Sounds simple. I had the tremendous fortune last night of two gentlemen came in to find out a little bit more, find out who I am and what I'm talking about, and get a little more information about what is Buddhism. There's not a lot in this area of the country to choose from for sources, for resources. So this is why I'm recording this lesson in the morning. Ooh, the light is changing in here. I hope that doesn't bother you too much. But we have some very large windows in the Kun and bathes this place in light. It's really wonderful. I hope that if you're anywhere near me, that you can come and experience this little building and what we do here. So this is why I had to engage with them. So I got down on the main floor and pulled up a chair, and we just sat around for about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, and I tried in that amount of time to give the whole Buddhist picture to these people, and They were wonderful listeners. They participated, asked some questions, um, and I really feel like their practice is going to continue, whether it's with me or whether it's through the books they found here. Um, I don't have any ego attached to that. I just want people to be introduced to the teachings of Buddha, because if they get it straight, if they get it without a bunch of other mired baloney and rhetoric, with using wrong language, if they get it the direct language, even if it sounds complicated, they're going to get it. And they're going to start digging for themselves and wonder, where'd this come from? Where'd this come from? That's Buddhism. Because then your motivation becomes greater. Your determination becomes greater. Your resolution becomes greater. Do you see? It's a self-motivated practice. It's a discovery mode. This is why when you learn something, you truly appreciate it, because it's happening in your own mind. It's not being fed to you. Okay? This is a very important concept in Buddhism. Now, this is supposedly, in a way, it's part of this series that I've started with the 3,000 realms. But what I've been trying to do with this series is I've gone back to the first phase and the second phase or periods of Buddhist teachings. So before I give you the next boom, I want to read some of, not all of it, but I have a paper I posted online called The Five Periods. And this is from Tendai Buddhism. And this is when the scholarship of Buddhism first clearly demonstrated, and I hope you understand, Buddhism has always been built on scholarship, not only of a brilliant individual, but somebody. The history of Buddhism is national debate, not just sectarian debate, but the heads of different schools of thought of Buddhist teachings would get together on a national forum. Imagine that. And they would have to not just quote sources, but demonstrate that those quotes were authentic, and that with deep perception, demonstrate how they fit in the canon of Buddhism and why they excluded certain erroneous thoughts and why they enforced this kind of thought. And so the scholarship at work in these debates was very deep and very broad. It had to be, because these debates always had the goal of resolving what is the true, correct understanding of Buddha's words, Buddha's teaching. And that happens over and over and over and over again in the history of Buddhism. So it's kind of a self-correcting practice, as that even though, and it's inevitable, some practice of any sort, once it moves around to different peoples, different countries, different languages, and when it moved to China, different language, different words had to be created to encapsulate the concepts that came from Indian language. They didn't even have words for it in China. So there had to be tremendous thought and scholarship to establish what this new character would say in ancient Chinese and how it would be constructed and what it represented. So even down to the nitty-gritty of words, correction is constantly at work in Buddhism. Okay, so the 5 periods of teachings, although they were always around, Tendai, Qi, the incredible Chinese, 6th century Chinese scholar, it made it his life's work to, in essence, clean up all of the different, there's a lot of suttas or sutras, whether you use Pali or Sanskrit, they're the same word, teachings, basically. There's a lot of volumes of teachings. And some of them, got muddied as they traveled through India and then into China, or either through northern China or southern China, through Burma. Things were just attached, and some teachings that claimed to be the words of Buddha just didn't fit. They just didn't. They didn't resonate with the obvious clear path that Buddha was teaching in and bringing to the people. So Tendai was the scholar who did a lot of cleaning up. And in that cleaning up, he discovered that there were 5 distinct periods of teachings. So now I've given you all this preface. We all know about dependent reality and phenomenal existence, emptiness. We've talked about all of that. The books that I've been reading on Tendai, and boy, does he get down to the nitty gritty. He wrote 3 major treatises that basically the whole Tendai school is based on. Is the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra, where he gets down to the actual characters and what they mean, and we're going to talk about that today. The commentary of the Lotus Sutra, or on the Lotus Sutra, so that now he writes another major work to, as from Tendai's perspective in time and the capacity of the people, the meanings of the Lotus Sutra. And then the third one, the Greater Samatha Vispayana, is a method of meditation in his time. And then he wrote what they call the 5 small books, which are also very important treatises. The commentary of the visualization of Buddha, the profound meaning of the Golden Light Sutra, the commentary on the Golden Light Sutra, the profound meaning of the Kuan Yin Sutra, and the commentary of the Kuan Yin Sutra. So he's talking about the Lotus Sutra, the Mahaparinibbana Sutra. I always have problems saying that. Anyway, so we get to the 5 divisions, or the 5 periods in chronology of the Buddha's life. And I think it's interesting not only to see what the 5 periods are, but the amount of time that Buddha dedicated to each phase. So I think I told you before, the first thing he did after his enlightenment, the first teachings were the Avatamsaka, or in Japanese, the Kigan Sutra. These sutras were taught by the Buddha immediately after attaining his enlightenment. It revealed the greatness of Buddhism, that universe is the expression of the true suchness, or absoluteness. This is the part where I spoke about the quiescent energy and how subtle or major events and the construction of karma, motive force behind action, create karma. Okay? But let me back up a little bit. Before that, the subtle chains, just talking about the idea of a quiescent energy being what all life comes from and returns to, is a concept that is very difficult for anyone to understand, even today, although we have science to back it up now. Certainly 3,000 years ago, people just couldn't wrap their minds around it. So, as it states in this document, the target audiences were the Bodhisattvas, though teaching, and these were learned people. The teachings were too profound for most of the Buddha's general disciples to grasp. This phase lasted for 21 days, not very long. It became painfully apparent to Shakyamuni that the people of his time didn't have the capacity to really grasp this teaching. Later on, 1,000 years later, in Chi's time, this teaching was referred to as the sudden teaching, the idea of sudden enlightenment. Just the light comes on and you get it. But this is a very, very extremely rare event. This is something, well, Shakyamuni himself, Siddhartha himself, spent over 6 years in torturous modes of meditation and asceticism looking for this thing. And at one point, basically, he just said, okay, I'm not getting the answer. So now I'm going to let myself die, or I'm going to get the answer, one or the other. I'm that determined, strong mind, that I know the answer exists to get rid of human suffering. I just need to understand how to do it. And that's how he came to the Lotus Sutra, the Avatamsaka. Basically, if you read the Avatamsaka, it's an immense document full, replete, overflowing with examples of what the Buddha, the Amala consciousness is like. So if you have no idea how to get there, knowing what it looks like, it sounds like, it smells like, and touches, and all this stuff, it's impressive, but it doesn't help you figure out how to get there. So this is what happened in the first 21 days. So then he shifted, and the second period is identified as the Agama Sutra. And there are several sutras around that. Because the Buddha's disciples did not understand the principal idea of the teaching during the first period, he then expounded the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the teaching of dependent arising. The dependent arising is when I started talking about these subtle relationships and causal chains, developing volition, the formation of karma, how something comes from nothing, basically. Phenomena coming from nomina. Of course, you and I understand that nothing is really the quiescent energy. It's just that all it is potential until some will is activated to put action together to create causes that then multiply upon each other to manifest form from energy. Right? That was a quick condensation of a couple of hours of videos there. So the second period is immediately then he started taking apart what he just said. He said, okay, you guys need to understand how this happens. So the second period is teaching them how karma is created and how something comes from nothing. He spent 12 years just teaching that. And I mean by teaching, back then people didn't write stuff down. The way they learned was constant repetition. They would say things, they would ask a question 3 different ways before Buddha would then answer it and say, okay, you've asked in enough ways, I will let you know. This is how it's done. That was a format, okay? But once the teaching was expounded, the job of the disciples was to spend every day meditating and repeating, chanting, or reciting those exact words. And the interesting thing, what you'll find when you read sutras, is they're always done in the first person. And there's a reason for that. If I make you repeat something that says, I this, I heard that, I did this, then this was asked, then this was answered, I'm also inculcating in you the idea that this is your discovery. Throughout Buddha's teachings, this is a total constant. This is you doing the work. This isn't you hearing it and then being bestowed knowledge. This is knowledge you're figuring out. And the more times you recite it, the more times you'll actually get it. Because what you're actually doing is awakening, the key word, what you already know. You just confounded by all these obstacles. You're millions of monkeys, right? They're in the way. So if I tell you the correct way and you repeat the correct way for yourself, you will connect with the correct way. It's already in you. I'm just, by repeating it, you're making an aisle through the the baloney, right? So that 12 years of teaching that just so they could start to get the original teachings of what it is to get there. The third period, the Vaipulya Sutras, In this teaching, the Buddha taught the introduction of Mahayana. He stated the superiority of Bodhisattva over an Arhat, and the unity of Buddha and sentient beings of absolute and relative. This phase lasted for 8 years. So no small amount of time that he asked his disciples to really focus on, okay, the idea that you can become enlightened as an earthly being, as a knowledgeable person, but never experience the state of Bodhisattva or the state of Buddhahood, because you're a human, you're limited by what you can experience. In the third period, he blew that up. He said, okay, Arhat is not the max you can reach as a human. You can actually reach your Buddhahood, your Amala consciousness, your knowledge and equanimity with everything by understanding it. And whether you choose to remain on this earth and teach others, or you do this simply for yourself, Bodhisattva and Buddhahood, they're already in you. Again, you just need to awaken to that knowledge, that understanding, that perception, that knowing. Then the fourth period was the period of the Prajnaparamita Sutta. The Buddha taught his disciples the meaning of emptiness in this period. So he kind of comes back around to what he tried to teach him in the first place. Three of the central teachings on emptiness are the great, the middle length, and the shorter Paramita Sutra, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras in English. In all of these sutras, a complete explanation of both aspects of the path to Buddhahood, i.e. wisdom and method, was given. The fourth period lasted for 22 years. This was a really, really, really important phase, because now he was really getting them, the people of his time, to stretch and understand that emptiness isn't nothing. It's nothing in the sense that it's nomina, but it's this roiling, quiet potential, just waiting, just being there. It doesn't really need to manifest anything. It's just ready to manifest anything. And that in itself is a subtle cause. There's an unrest that allows things to sometimes coalesce, and then they just fade right back in. Remember the subtle karma, if you will. It just forms and then just exhausts itself right back in. And then larger events that immediately precipitate a bunch of other causal chains, a lot of other reactions to a chain reaction. And if there's enough motive built to the energy, it continues to create more and more possibility until there's enough of a will or desire to instantiate itself, to perceive itself, that it then creates a material or phenomenal form. Okay, but that also, to create that phenomenal form, has to happen in an environment in which the form can exist. So this is why in Buddhism, the self and the environment are always treated as the same thing. This is part of the perceptive problem, is we see the land and the trees and the other people and the cows and everything else as something other. And this has always been a false understanding of life and what we are. We are all exactly from the same place, created in the same way, with different tendencies and conditions. Bottom line. Understanding that at its fundament, when it's used, that's a wisdom. Knowing it is a knowledge. Using it in interactions as a human is wisdom. Because then, instead of reacting and being influenced by other, we understand it's not other, it's the same, so it doesn't influence us or throw us into tantrums or, enliven our monkeys to start telling us all, it's egoistic version of the world. We see it truthfully, and that's Buddhist compassion. So for 22 years, he's explaining this. And evidently, after 22 years, he figured he had enough understanding to then give them the path to enlightenment on top of all this knowledge. In other words, here's the shortcut, if you will, for anybody, no matter what their capacity to learn is. In the future, people will know enough basic inculcated cultural knowledge that all any of them need to do is this. It's really simple. It's simple, but it's based on understanding all of this other stuff. It's just that by doing this simple thing and study, doing this simple thing combined with a resolute mind, and resolute to what? To really bore into this thing for your own life and figure out what's going on here. You're responsible for everything in your life. Your environment is you. Now study and you'll figure out how that's true for you. And this is your starting point. This is your vehicle that ultimately will just continue to grow in significance the more you study and practice. And that is the fifth period of the Lotus Sutra, then the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, is really kind of a commentary on the Lotus Sutra. It's a story that implements what was taught in the Lotus Sutra. So the Lotus Sutra is the ultimate teaching. This was the big discovery that Tendai made. And when he organized everything, it became super obvious that it was. And the Buddha spent the last 8 years of his life. Remember now, this is 3,000 years ago. Human lifespan wasn't that long. I mean, if you lived to 40, you were an old man. Buddha lived to the age of 80. This last 8 years, what he focused on most was essentially wrapping up the 4 previous periods, and stated that the 3 vehicles, the 3 yana or the Tripitaka, of the Shravakas, the Arhats, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the really another word for the same thing, people who are of realization and great learning, and the Bodhisattvas as well, people who were ready to enter nirvana. They had achieved the Buddha wisdom, but were still here as earthly components or proponents of Buddhist teaching, have only provisional validity, and that all of them will eventually merge into a single vehicle, ekayana, toward the great nirvana. What? In the beginning of the Lotus Sutra, even the introduction of the Lotus Sutra, Buddha says, okay, everything I've taught for these 15 more years, forget about it, throw it away. Don't throw it away, but set it aside. Because now I'm going to teach you the truth. I don't know about you, but if I follow somebody for 52 years and they say, okay, now I'm going to tell you the real thing, I don't know. I think that would throw me into a bit of confusion, but I don't think it was said quite the way I'm saying it. Basically, it's very poetic when you read the Lotus Sutra. It's the form of the Lotus Sutra is in the form of a great gathering, and that gathering is of all types of Buddhists, early, latter, arhats, bodhisattvas, even unbelievers. I mean, gathering of the human race, if you will, all pictured on the Gohonzon behind me. Can you see it? that is a caricature, if you will, of all the concepts in the Lotus Sutra. The story of the Lotus Sutra is in the Gohonzon. And right down the center is Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So what do those words mean? People get very confused. You know, what is that? Magical words? Am I just abracadabra? I'm going to be Buddha? No. Basically, the reason I took the time to go over these, and there's more in here when you go, if you download the document and print it out or just read it online, you'll read about the sudden method, which I already mentioned, the gradual method, the secret method, blah, 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 blah. Hinayana versus something else. Anyway, there's one other thing I would touch on here called the complete or round teaching. And all of this applies to the 5 periods, which I encourage you to study more about. I'm going to get away from reading because, as I already said, I don't like to do that. Yes, much sunlight. So 5 periods, it's no mistake that there are 5 characters to the ultimate teaching. Myo, Ho, Reng, Ge, Kyo. So you could think of it this way. I have 2 different descriptions of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo on the website. One is I'll say the populist definition. It's always left me feeling a little bit short, though. Well, I'm only 5'8", so I guess I'm a little bit short. But, little comedy. What you'll find almost everywhere you look for a definition on Myoho Renge Kyo is a definition that attempts to explain the meaning of the characters. What you have to understand is that much of what you see on the Gohonzon is an amalgam. It's not a language that anyone typically speaks in any culture. It's an amalgam of some, I guess I'd call it Indo-Chinese invention. Remember I said there were concepts that came from India in the high-level Sanskrit language for the teaching class, the brains of humanity, where they passed on knowledge from one generation to the next. And when it got to China, there were some concepts that it just didn't have words for, so they had to invent words to represent those concepts. And then once again, by the time it got to China, there were adjustments and customized language made to represent these concepts. So if you follow me on that, then it will be no great mystery that the main characters, the title of the Lotus Sutra, Myoho Renge Kyo, the title of every chapter of the 28 chapters in the Lotus Sutra start with Myoho Renge Kyo and then something delineating that particular chapter. And this is what Nichiren is an incredible scholar, and also why his elucidation of the Lotus Sutra is a sect in itself. Is that after studying broadly all over China and India and Japan and Korea and so forth, he read all these treatises and aligned himself with a lot of what Tendai was saying as a preeminent scholar. He discovered after reading, Tendai wrote some treatises on the custom characters of Myoho Renge Kyo. What's the significance of Myo? What's the significance of Ho? Not only was it the significance of the character, but the way the character was designed, each component of the character, the color of the character, the color of the paper the character was put on. I mean, I told you, Tendai was a deep penetrator of knowledge. So each of these characters you could read an entire treatise on. But even though he knew this, he didn't understand that the purpose of that depth of knowledge for the character Myo, let's say, was that that's all you needed to invoke as you study, instead of having to invoke the whole lesson that you guys have gotten in the last 6 or 7 videos about the quiescent energy and the causal chains and the emptiness, phenomena, volition, action, karma. I mean, it would be almost impossible to do what took 12 years of teaching here, 21 years of teaching there, and try to encapsulate all that in one sitting meditation. So remember Buddha, Shakyamuni, or Siddhartha, if you will, his whole commitment in life was how to get rid of suffering in everyday life. And everyday life means not only the elites, not only the scholars, but the farmer, the guy who raises pigs for a living and lives in slop, the beggar. Every human being, if this is a true teaching, if this is truly knowledge, every human being should be able to benefit from it and reduce the suffering in their life. So if I want a teaching that's true and able to alleviate suffering in anyone, then I can't base it solely on this depth of knowledge and scholarship. I have to have that as a base to know that I've got the truth. But teaching somebody who barely has speaking skills, doesn't know how to read or write, to dig this deeply into self-knowledge, it's just, they're not equipped for it. So if I can reduce all of this into just some very simple practice that will begin to make fissures crack the illusory world, crack through the ego, and start to open up a path, then to the degree of that person's resolute mind, they will by themselves deepen their knowledge. And even if they don't get to a state of bodhisattva, they will know Buddhahood. They will know it because it's already in them. I just want to scratch away at their egos and the illusions until they get little ahas from it and they get there. So what he did is he designed these 5 characters, and Myo represents the Avatamsaka Sutra and the teaching of the unknowable vastness of this quiescent energy and the beginning and end of everything. Everything. It's like a life process he's taking you through. And he's saying, from this nomina we come, and into this nomina we return. And what we call life as humans, the span between birth and death, is really not all of life. All of life includes the entire process, and birth and death are just markers. They're markers of our instantiation as phenomena and our return and disembodiment and reintegration to the process through death. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. It's just the other side of the coin. And what we are in between is where we're trying to negotiate right now. Because the very fact of the craving and attachment that was necessary in order to make us instantiate as a human being is the thing that keeps us suffering as a human being. And if we can open our knowledge base to what is beyond, what is the fundament of what is already in our bodies, it's all around us, it's through us, it's in us, this quiescent, calm equanimity, if we can perceive that as the truth, then we can rid ourselves more and more of the monkeys, the ego, the suffering, because we'll be putting a stop to, or at least a strong appeasement of the basic cravings and attractions that cause our sufferings. That's Buddhism. That's it. So Myo is that part. Ho is the instantiation. From that, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, everything starts to be about this lifetime now. Because that's pragmatic. That's what Buddha was working on. It wasn't working on, you needed to identify the quiescent, where we come from, where we go to. But as soon as you identify that, you got that, what we need to work on now is the here and now, your lifespan. Because this is where the suffering happens. And this is what I want to get rid of. That's all of Buddhism. So Ho is the period where, boom, instantiation happens. Physical world, phenomena. And then Renge, again, in the provincial discussion of Renge, it's a lotus flower, arises from a muddy swamp, and it's a demonstrator of cause and effect, and that's about the size of what you get from most things. What I want you to get, and you'll probably never hear this from anyone else. I have never heard it. But it's obvious to me with the study that I've made that the Renge is this lifetime. It's an equation. You've gone Myo, and then Ho is the instantiation. Now, what happens now from birth to death is Renge. The lotus flower comes from a muddy swamp. Why? Because the muddy swamp represents the Myo and the Ho. And Ren, the first syllable, is about the lotus flower growing in that muddy swamp. So in other words, that's delusion. The muddy swamp is muddy. Why is it muddy? Because it can't see clearly through it. We can't see the wonderful soil that we're born in. We just have this cloud of ego and illusion, and yet here we are, this glorious flower, right? The next thing that happens with the flower is as it blossoms, the pod spits out seeds for the next lotus blossoms. It's instantaneous. There's not the beautiful flower. It exists for a while, and seeds grow, and then it deposits them, and then it starts to wither. The point of the lotus flower is that when it blossoms, bloop, the seeds come out just as it blossoms. The simultaneity of cause and effect is the example here, is that everything we do in our life, thought, word, action, deed, those are causes. We're putting into motion causal chains. This is what's meant by creating karma. And when we create karma, we are making a cause for something. A cause that maybe accumulates with other causes, other causal chains, or just has a result of its own. That result, that effect, whether the effect is to combine with other effects or other causes, or just have its own spectacular effect directly related to that singular cause, the effect is instantly built into the cause. It's not a cause and then, as I was saying, it amalgamates maybe with other causes, but this happens in the blink of an eye. And all of it has individually effects and cumulative effect. And some of that effect, even though it's already created, may not manifest until later in your life. It may manifest right away. If you hit your thumb with a hammer, it won't take long for you to go, how? Okay? There's a pretty direct relationship between cause and effect there. But then there are other causal things that you do, like hurt people's feelings, or not respect certain people, or attitudes. You know, Buddhism is very much, watch your attitudes, because that's a core clue as to what's going on in you and how your mind works. And Buddhism is all about that. So, Renge is about our lifetime, how we come into this confusion. Every cause we make is precipitates an immediate effect and cause for more causal chains, more things to manifest in our lives and in our environment, because our environment is us. So one question you get is, how do I quell my own suffering and the suffering of the world around me? Well, those sound like two questions, but they're really one. Because by solving your suffering, your wisdom will change the way you speak, the way you think, the way you make causes and create causal chains. And that immediately affects your environment. And your environment includes other people. So it starts always in Buddhism. You are everything. So that's Myoho Renge, and the final character, Kyo. This is what makes the Lotus Sutra unique in the type of teaching that it is, which is often referred to as round, because it's cyclic in not only in time, but cyclic, more importantly, in its understanding. Is that Kyo is a representative character signifying an amalgam of all the teachings and the resolute mind to know and understand them. So it takes you right back up to Myo. Do you see what I mean? From a standpoint of a chant, that if you invoke each of these characters, you are invoking a strong desire, a resolute mind to understand and penetrate deeply all of the Buddha's teachings so that you can understand the nature of life itself, and with that develop the wisdom to calm the monkeys, to stop dissonant emotions from rising, and embrace them. I mean, when an emotion comes up, emotions basically are the monkeys yelling at you. Um, how do you respond? Do you just let it express itself and start more causal chains, more pain? Or are you able to stop it and understand it, and more than that, begin to talk to it from the standpoint of, where did you come from? What in my karmic makeup is instantiating you? Why is this causal chain starting in me? What is precipitating it? And go deeper and deeper until you can find the original causes of this emotion or reaction happening, and put it to rest. Okay? So with that, I'm going to close today's lesson. Nam Myo Renge Kyo. Nam Myo Renge Kyo. Nam Myo Renge Kyo. Thank you for joining me. Go to the website, print out information, study, and I will see you next time. Thanks.